Always great to hear all of the conversation going on as we gather, which is one of the hallmarks of the GMC. All right, welcome everyone. Good afternoon, welcome to the GMC annual membership meeting. Not just any member meeting, this corporate secretary is all excited. It's the annual membership meeting. My name's Peggy Kelsey and I am the board chair of the GMC. I would first like to welcome some new GMC members to today's meeting and into the GMC membership. We're really pleased with the enthusiastic reception to the GMC's new strategic direction. This is demonstrated by the Milwaukee leaders who have become members. With us today are the following new members, at least I believe you're all here. Please stand or wave when I call your name. Abby Andrich, president of St. Aug Prep. Daniel Jackson, market president, Ascension, Wisconsin. Clarence Johnson, president and CEO, Wisconsin Community Services. Andy Keller, managing director and market manager, JP Morgan Chase. And Clifton Phelps, VP of Business Development, JCP Construction. So welcome to all of you. We look forward to getting to know you better and including your perspectives and your leadership in our important work. And now I'll turn to the brief business portion of the annual meeting before we dive into the meat of today's gathering. Pursuant to written notice previously mailed to all members, I hereby call to order the business meeting portion of the 2024 annual meeting of the Greater Milwaukee Committee. First up, approval of the minutes. All of you received a copy of the minutes from the 2023 annual meeting via email, and a copy is also on the screen. Not that you can read it from back there, but do I have a motion to dispense with the reading of the minutes and move to approve? All in favor say aye. Any opposed? Thank you, that passes. Now on to the budget review. And I'm very happy to report that the GMC had a balanced budget in 2023, and our annual audit is being conducted by Riley, Penner, and Benton. The GMC Board of Directors approved the 2024 budget, which includes a new internal organizational structure that is more reflective of our strategic priorities. As you know, with less programmatic funding and discrete work, and more member-led work surrounding those strategic priorities. The programmatic initiatives included significant costs, but of course also generated revenue for us. Our pivot away from that structure means we are more member-centric, both in what we are doing in the community and how we are funded. In that regard, as I highlighted last month, dues notices were sent out to all members. Many thanks to the significant number of members who've already paid your dues. And if you've not yet taken care of that, I ask you to please make it a priority this week. Thank you for that. Now up to the board roster approval. Up for member vote today is a slate presented for election to the Board of Directors for the 3-year term ending in February 2027. They are indicated in the first column of this slide. The other columns indicate those continuing in service. Those up for election are, I'm going to turn this way, make sure my notes match this. All looks good. Elizabeth Brenner, Tina Chang, John Daniels Jr., Ellen Gilligan, Cecilia Gore, Ted Kellner, Linda Mellows, and Wayne Morgan. Do I have a motion to accept the slate as presented by the board? Second, all in favor, say aye. Any opposed? Thank you, the motion passes. A real quick reminder to all members of the GMC board who are here today, please stick around for about 2 minutes after the meeting today for our annual meeting activities. And now I would like to invite Betsy Brenner to the podium to share an update on the GMC's Fiscal Strength Committee. As we've talked about before, Betsy and David Gay have agreed to co-chair this committee, and Betsy will be providing us with an update on the status of their work. Welcome, Betsy.
Good afternoon. I'm Betsy Breyer, retired from the Journal Sentinel and a GMC board member. More importantly, I live in the city of Milwaukee. I think like a lot of you that are ties here, there was great fear around the so-called fiscal cliff that we faced in recent years. Financial disaster and what it could do to the city was on all of our minds. And we think, what would it mean that the city wouldn't be able to deliver basic services, provide an environment where residents and businesses could grow and thrive? And we know that Milwaukee's budget gap was huge, and it really threatened the vitality of the city that we know and love. Well, thanks to collaborative efforts spearheaded by Mayor Johnson and County Executive Crowley, and the efforts of a number of you in this room, private sector, public sector, we achieved a historic easing of the crisis with the passage of Act 12. We brought vital new revenue into our community in the form of additional state shared revenue and a new local sales tax. These new revenues don't solve the entire challenge we're up against, but they do give us some breathing room so we can come up with more creative solutions. Well, the GMC led an effort last year to examine the city of Milwaukee operations. The goal here was how we might deliver services more effectively and efficiently, save money where possible, and where possible, consolidate or optimize. The report was delivered in November, and if you haven't had a chance to look at it, I would really urge you taking the time, because there is some terrific work that will really inspire us in months to come. David Gay of EY and I volunteered to help steer the GMC's Fiscal Strength and Innovation Task Force. Well, this is the group that will study and work to implement the many good recommendations in the report. We'll collaborate with the city and with the public sector to take that report and make sure that the feasible action steps contained in it see progress this year. Well, as I mentioned, the worst outcome, loss of hundreds of cops and firefighters, dramatic service cutbacks, those are no longer on the table. But the city will still likely face a structural deficit this year of somewhere in the neighborhood of $50 million. That makes the efficiency study and its recommendations even more important, and we're lucky to have willing partners in the public sector to help get us done. Well, David and I met last week with the mayor's office and the city budget director. In coming weeks, the city will be filling the very important role of innovation director. That's the person who will take this report and its recommendations and ensure that we see progress. Well, that's where you come in. David and I will be reaching out to GMC members later this week to see if we can re-engage those of you who helped with this work last year, or see if there are new volunteers that want to be part of the effort. We know we can provide the right level of support and gentle nudging at City Hall if we need to. Help the city ensure that we keep the momentum on reform growing. You'll hear from us later this week with an invitation, and we welcome your participation. Well, we have some immediate action steps that were provided in the report, but others are looking at efficiency from different angles. The Wisconsin Policy Forum is examining the consolidation of city and county services, for example, and we know that their work will help inform our work as we move forward. We believe that cooperation like this can help make Milwaukee a national leader when it comes to partnering the public and private sectors to provide accountable services and ensure that the services are delivered equitably, efficiently, and effectively. This is very exciting work. We hope we can enlist you in more of it, and we're just grateful for the momentum we have so far going forward. Thank you.
Good afternoon. We really appreciate Betsy's efforts along with those of David Gay and other leaders in the community around us. As soon as we're finished here today, Betsy and I are going to head across the street to City Hall to talk to the Steering and Rules Committee, which is the committee made up of all of the committee chairs for the Common Council. I was invited to discuss the operational review, talk about what steps we need to take from here. As I think everyone here knows, the mayor and the executive branch are deeply invested in this. We want to make sure that the legislative branch at the city is similarly deeply involved and invested as we move forward. As Betsy mentioned, they're about to hire new personnel that's going to be dedicated to this. And so we just want to make sure, because again, as Betsy said, the news is much better than it could have been, but it's still not where we want and need to be as a community. And I think we're at a point where the public sector and the private sector are kind of at a high ebb in terms of the work that we have done together over the last several months. And there's opportunity for us to continue that forward and to make sure that we have the momentum to truly change the way that we operate in this community for the future. Another relevant public policy topic that we want to invite you to engage on is the redistricting situation in the state of Wisconsin. You received an invitation to join us for a virtual conversation this coming Friday over the lunch hour with John Johnson, who's a Marquette University Law School research fellow and really probably the state's foremost expert on the rapidly changing redistricting landscape. Most of the people here know that the Wisconsin State Supreme Court struck down the current legislative maps in December. The state must have new maps pretty much by the middle of March. The legislature, the governor, the state Supreme Court, all involved in the eventual outcome. John's going to help to provide an up-to-the-minute update on the current status of this issue, because it's Monday and I can guarantee you by Friday the landscape may well have changed on this. Tom Florsheim, GMC member, will also provide a toolkit for engaging employees in their civic duty as a part of the Nonpartisan Business Leaders for Democracy effort. And I hope all of you who have a chance will join us and even share with a colleague who might benefit from knowing more about this and how all this will turn out. We'll send an invitation in the next day or so and hope that you can join us. One personnel note that I want to begin with: Laura Bolger departed the GMC in recent weeks to take over as the executive director of Bubbler Bikes. And I think I've made a number of these comments about people departing the GMC over the last several months. As Betsy was talking about, with our renewed focus, people who are working on some of the initiatives have moved on to other places in the community. I'm really happy to say that while these colleagues have departed, we're thrilled that every one of them that has left us has moved on to and landed with other community partners in places like the Milwaukee Tech Hub, Rooted and Rising, the Wisconsin Policy Forum, the Wisconsin Museum of Art, other places like that. We look forward to continuing with them in their new capacities. In addition to Betsy's update on fiscal strength and innovation, I want to give just a couple of other committee and task force updates. Greg Marcus is leading up efforts around member engagement and has reached out, or will soon, to a small group of members who want to dedicate some time to ensuring that we all get as much out of your membership experience as you possibly can. This will include things like small group gatherings, other social activities, deeper connections to peers, provocative member meeting topics and locations, and other work. And we really appreciate Greg's leadership on this and others who have volunteered their time and energy to this effort. In that same vein, a group of about 12 members is gathering next week with me, with Rob Henkin, a couple of others, to kick off our efforts around public safety in 2024. As I previously have noted, we're collaborating with Rob and the Policy Forum on public safety focused research, which will outline for this group to get their input. We'll also lay out some other alternatives for action steps in 2024 for feedback and input. Once that meeting is completed, we're going to invite other members to the table to join those efforts. The initial conversations are being led by Dan Bader, who's also hosting this kickoff meeting, and former County Executive Ernell Lucas, who now works with Bob Howe, GMC member at Fiserv. As with much of what we're doing, this effort's going to focus on strengthening existing work going on in the community and partners and existing partners, and finding ways to connect some of the innovative solutions that are taking root in Milwaukee neighborhoods. The efforts related to early education that we dove into in January will flow into deeper discussions with Vincent Lyles, Milwaukee Succeeds, and a group of interested members. You'll get details in the coming days about that effort related to advocacy and collaboration. Finally, we're going to convene a couple of infrastructure-related discussions with members and stakeholders in the next several weeks around relevant topics regarding Milwaukee's built environment. John Kissinger from GRAFE has been part of the discussions to put these together and the planning, and we'll share more about that in the days to come. So now I'd like to introduce today's main program. As a follow-up to January's exploration of the connection between early childhood education, workforce, and economic development, today we're focused on what I think can appropriately be called a crisis at the opposite end of the educational spectrum, exploring opportunities and major challenges within the higher educational landscape. Demographics, costs, diversity, equity, ideology, free speech, and other issues are deeply intertwined with higher education challenges, and we've seen dramatic changes in the local and statewide landscape in just the last 12 months. The sudden closure of Cardinal Stritch in 2023 was certainly a shock to the system, but also a symptom of these challenges that are faced in Wisconsin and nationally. Higher education institutions in Southeastern Wisconsin have been working together for the last 6 years to meet the immediate and long-term challenges that will make them stronger partners in delivering workforce and problem solvers of the future. Back in 2018, the leaders of the 17 higher educational institutions formed the Higher Education Regional Alliance, known as HERA, a collaboration of higher educational institutions, economic development organizations, community partners who seek to increase college completion, align and evolve with the economy, and expand talent here in Wisconsin. While they continue their commitment to these goals, higher education leaders also face an increasingly existential crisis over the many challenges related to their business model. They're here today to actively seek input and insight from those in this room, local business and community leaders. Before I introduce the panel, I want to recognize all the higher education leaders, both GMC members and non-members, who are joining us here today. I welcome all the representatives from HERA institutions in attendance to stand for our appreciation and recognition. So please stand. There's a number of you in the room. So today we welcome HERA founding chair and UWM Chancellor Mark Mone, and incoming HERA chair and president of Carroll University, Cindy Gnadinger, to participate in a curated conversation moderated by GMC member Greg Wesley. We'll also have table discussions after their discussion. And our other higher educational leaders, as you saw, are sprinkled amongst the tables to help engage in those frank and direct discussions about the pathway for higher education. Mark Mone became the 9th Chancellor of UWM in December 2014. He's been on the UWM faculty since 1989, serving in various roles, including Associate Dean for Executive Education and Business Management. Most recently, before becoming Chancellor, served as the Chancellor's designee for Strategic Planning and Climate and Campus Climate. Dr. Mone is the founding chair of the Higher Education Regional Alliance. Dr. Cindy Gnadinger was named Carroll University's 15th president in July 2017. She was previously an executive consultant to the Office of the President at Bellarmine University in Louisville, Kentucky. She's had a strong career as president, provost, and vice president for academic affairs in schools throughout Kentucky and North Carolina prior to moving here to Wisconsin. Undoubtedly moved here for the weather. Dr. Gnadinger is the incoming chair for HERA and will take over the chairmanship this summer. I should also mention that Vicki Martin is the current chair and will be departing that, including to departing her role at MATC. And while we will have time to, I think, recognize her accomplishments in that work, I just want to note, and I know she's here with us today, that Vicki is someone who has had a huge impact and a positive impact on Milwaukee's community. So thank you, Vicki. Our conversation will be curated today by Greg Wesley, who's the Senior Vice President of the Medical College of Wisconsin. Greg receives his undergraduate degree from Indiana University, his law degree from UW-Madison. Amongst his many volunteer endeavors in our community, Greg is currently the chair of the board for Teach for America, in addition to chairing the board for the Boys and Girls Clubs of Greater Milwaukee. So there aren't many people who have as much of a connection to that entire spectrum of education than our friend Greg. I want to welcome the presenters to the stage. I think Cindy and Mark are going to start with a few slides, and then we'll follow up with that moderated conversation. Cindy, Mark, it's all yours.
Thank you, Joel. Great setup, and I would like to welcome all of our Higher Ed Regional Alliance leaders, and I'll start with a few slides, and then Dr. Gnadinger will handle some of the fun stuff in the middle, and then I'll wrap up with some of the things that we're doing. So, the thing I'd like to start with is who we are, and then I'll talk briefly about what we do. We have 6 minutes for this presentation, so Cindy, we're going to be on a roll here. So, as we've heard, we have 17 members. We had 18 when we began 6 years ago with Cardinal Stritch. We have 17 higher education members, and then we have 9 community and economic development partners across the bottom. And what we've come together to realize is that the challenges that are facing higher education today, and really business and healthcare and nonprofit sector, are much larger than what any one institution alone. So we've joined forces, and we really find a lot of effectiveness and power in doing this. Specifically, we have 3 goals. We focus first and foremost on the students. And what we recognized is that with an equity lens, there's a lot of individuals who are left behind, and there's a lot of opportunities. And whether you look at MMAC data, the Policy Forum data, or others, one side of the crisis is the significant talent shortage that we have. The other side is a lot around the objective issues in terms of some of the demography, the fact that, as I'll often say, President Stith, we're running out of teenagers, and you know very much what I mean, just the demography. Whether we look at this at the Cristo Reys or the St. Augustine, these are what we need, and of course MPS and all the different charter schools. So we focus on students, and our central goal here is to have more individuals get certificates, 2-year or 4-year degrees. We'll talk more about why that's so important for our economy and other things in a moment. Secondly, institutional programs. This is where the power of coming together makes a huge difference. We have strengths at every single one of the academic institutions in this region, but we can pull them together and not have to duplicate each other. So we can think about work like the transferology or certificate programs, a number of things we'll talk about. And finally, the employers, which is really where a lot of this demand comes from. And we wrote a column some years ago talking about 9 out of 10 CEOs, if you ask them what their #1 challenge is, they'll say it's that lack of talent at the right education level. People liked that column. It was part of the kickoff of the Higher Ed Regional Alliance. But a person came up to me later and said, who's that 1 out of 10 CEOs who doesn't need more talent? So we really focus from that particular perspective. And we'll talk again more about these particular areas. So that's who HERA is and what we do. Dr. Gnadinger.
Sorry. Thanks, Mark. I just wanted to take a moment and just address some of the things that many of us deal with on a regular basis, and some of you are aware of it as well, and those are the headwinds that are facing higher education today. I have a chart up here. I know it's hard to see, but the takeaway on this really is the changing demographics that Mark just mentioned. Clearly, you know, those children were not born 18 years ago, so they're not going to miraculously show up into our classes. And you can see from the chart, the little surge we all experienced post-pandemic is not long-term, and it's not going to stay. And we can see these in the closing of the elementary schools and the changes that are happening there. So they'll hit our college classrooms for 4 years, and then those people that did not come to college will not be out in the workforce after those 4 years. And so this is a big challenge that we're all dealing with. We know that, and I can speak from my own campus at Carroll University out in Waukesha, this is a a strategy we've been working on, and we know that there are people in our community who want to come back, not traditional 18 to 23-year-olds, but certainly older adults that want to come back for upskilling or reskilling or getting a credential. And so we're here to support that as part of the strategies for how we will be sustainable long term. And then also, I'm seeing the largest group of international students I've ever had at Carroll University in our 178 years, which is a good thing. So we know there are opportunities for us to still be able to bring workers to this community, but it's going to look different than what we've been doing in the past because of these changing demographics. Mark, you want to talk a little bit? This is really about public, so I'll let you do that since I run a private institution. But these are very real for, I know, many of my counterparts.
I'll give you the one-sentence version. You can see the trend line. Back in the dark ages when I first came to Wisconsin, not much before that, the University of Wisconsin system was funded almost half in terms of general program revenue of our budget. Today, less than 18% of our operating budget comes. So when you ask the question, why has tuition gone up? Why is the cost of education what it is? This is a large driver.
I think that's so important to address. And of course, at private institutions, we don't receive state appropriations in any way. This is something I know that was mentioned already this afternoon. Certainly, we don't need a crystal ball to see what's in front of us and what these headwinds are about. The painful closure of Cardinal Stritch last year. We know we're seeing these closures not just at privates, but at public institutions as well. And it's not just something that's impacting our region. This is a national trend. And so it's something that we know we need to be aware of, and then collaborative in our efforts. So you will see in the coming years more closures, more mergers. That's a trend that has been on the rise and continues to be on the rise. And then this slide is here. I just wanted to mention briefly, because we have a lot of conversation that we want to have, and we can get into this. But really, the narrative going on in the community, and I don't mean just local or even state. I mean the national narrative about whether or not the return on investment is important for students to invest in higher education, has been growing in its popularity. And so this is an area that really concerns those of us who work in higher education. And we'll talk a little bit more, as Mark said, why that is. Certainly we know for an economic advantage for our community, we need more students to engage in post-secondary education, whether that's 2-year, 4-year, public, private, all of that matters for our economic viability as a community. And then this is just, again, an illustration to show exactly what I was just talking about. And you can see Gallup did a poll back in 2015, 18, and repeated it again in 2023. And we can see that when people were asked about their confidence in higher education and the importance of higher education, we can see that those who responded a great deal or quite a lot has diminished through the years. And so this is the trend that we're talking about, and we're seeing as people are questioning the value of higher education and whether or not they should invest their time and their resources into going to higher education. So a lot more to talk about that, and I know we'll get to that with some of our questions as well. Mark, you want to take this one?
So the good news here is what we're doing about this, and we are really aligning back, as I said earlier, around a number of things that are needed and what you have voiced before in terms of some of the opportunities, particularly looking at this from an equity lens, which is so central to what we do at the Higher Ed Regional Alliance. On the left-hand side, we're working with a lot of employers around labor shortages specific to the different areas. Some of our campuses can talk about how we have almost 90% of our students, not only that come from Wisconsin and stay in Wisconsin, but that many that go into the highest need, fastest growth areas. At UWM, that number is 86%, which tells you about the alignment between what is needed and where our students are graduating. The different types of skilled talent, again, where that talent is needed and when, and thinking ahead, and that I think speaks, Dr. Gnadinger, to what you're talking about, the upskilling, reskilling, the dynamics that are needed in the workforce today. Employers are investing in the upskilling, the types of partnerships that you're going to hear about today. I think Dr. Barnhouse, the kind of work that's happening at WCTC and across our technical colleges really has that correspondence, and the innovation that's happening in higher ed is really underscored by the kinds of examples that you have. And then diversity. We're fortunate that in this region we have over 130 different employers that have signed up for the MMAC's region of choice, representing over 120,000 employees. And this is vitally important as we continue to see the needs for taking advantage of all the different talent that is in this region and also addressing the incredible disparities. Just to throw some, well, I'll wait till some additional slides here in terms of showing some of the numbers. This particular slide, there's a lot of information here. And let me just start. This comes from Georgetown Center for Education and Workforce. And what they found is that in the state of Wisconsin, we have achieved in the last decade 7% higher attainment in terms of graduation. So that's the good news. And that's going to result in $174 billion in lifetime earnings in the state of Wisconsin because of that increase. That's good. Those numbers are so large it's hard to really even grasp them. So let's bring this down a little more granularly. What you can see is this continuing education gap. As good as the news is, by having 7-point-some% increase in graduation, we see what happens in elementary school and early childhood education, those dramatic disparities that start young continue, not just in terms of high school. We have the greatest gap in black versus white high school graduation rates. High school in the country, we're 43rd Hispanic versus white, and those gaps continue into college. So this is what results. You see this lifetime earnings disparity that is dramatic. So that's why collective efforts are so necessary. At the bottom, you see some reasonably good news. 14th in the country in terms of associate degree attainment over the last decade. That's great. And then 27th, so we're in the middle of the pack in terms of overall college attainment. Oops. So the gap, just to put a little more specificity on the gap. Again, a lot of information here, but the blue represents those gaps, how they continue in college. So you see these large gaps. African American, 24% less attainment than white students. Hispanic, Latino. I've shared with GMC before some data that really tracks by zip code and shows some of this information. It's very concerning. We all should recognize this. The point here is that these gaps continue, and we will continue to work on that with some of the partnerships like these. 4 different things that we're doing in the region, and there's a lot of categories within these. One is the Moonshot for Equity. 5 HERA education members have joined forces with Education Advisory Board with a stand-up goal of saying by 2030 at our institutions, those gaps will be completely eliminated. That doesn't mean that other Higher Education Regional Alliance members are not working on that. It's important, vitally important to all of us, given the student populations that we serve. But this is huge. We were the first region in the country to stand up and commit to that goal, and we've been making some great progress. Combined student retention goal, we've made a goal for this year alone, 2024, to increase 6% retention, which will translate into 700 more graduates, and we have been tracking. I'll show you how we've been tracking and doing quite well, just in terms of retention. We have to keep the students first to second year, second to third, for them to graduate. Recruitment resources, we've combined forces here, using Handshake, the leading platform in the nation, for you to be able to access the talent across our regions. We know that some employers don't recruit from all the institutions, so here's an opportunity to have access to all the different places for you. And there's other activities, great toolkits and things on the website, HERA, Higher Ed Regional Alliance. And then micro-credentialing and certification programs, if you go to our website, this is the power where not all of us have to have expertise and development in AI or healthcare programs or other things, but combining forces, you can access a lot of great programs that we have. A lot of words, a lot of numbers. Stand back and just look at the big themes. On the left-hand side, you can see the big picture here, 25,000 degrees last year. That number has gone up between 2 and 5% over the last 3 years because of focus on greater attainment. And this is despite some of the dips and some of the things that the pandemic has brought us. What's more important are the arrows, the arrow points, the triangles over here that shows across all different groups, ages, race, background, we have achieved increases in almost everything by our focused work on what we're doing here together. And so this is really important when we talk about degrees on time and degrees looking at 150% of on time. So we're having great progress in that area. So that's kind of the quick quick blast through. And I think, Greg, we're going to have a moderated discussion now.
So, Mark and Cindy, thanks for the overview. I'm going to do a mic check. Can you hear me? All right, great. So the first thing I'm going to ask Mark or you, Cindy, to do is maybe just highlight the major accomplishment. There was a lot of data. What would you say is the most significant accomplishment for? I'm getting some feedback here.
No, I'm happy to answer that. And it really just piggyback off what Mark just said at the very last slide. So you can see we've made good progress in terms of collectively, as a HERA organization, all of us in this region, higher numbers of graduates out of our programs. And so we're really proud of that. And that comes from the collective effort. So we meet regularly, our presidents meet regularly, and then our staff who works in the areas of student success and retention, they meet with other like individuals from the other campuses. And we join forces in order to get better outcomes. We're able to bring in professional experts and speakers and professional development for all of our teams, and that's the power of HERA and some of the things that I know that I'm most proud of.
Mark?
And I would add trust and collaboration. Let me back up. We have never had, prior to HERA, the type of collaboration where it took us a year to build just the white paper, just to frame what our goals are, and to have that across public and private academic institutions that can bring their forces together to address these vexing issues in our region. That was the foundation, to build that trust, spend time together, and then for us to enable collaboration. The innovation, you have campuses that are experts in certain things, but to be able to bring that together so that we share those resources and skills, talent with everyone, that's huge.
Yeah, I just want to add to the uniqueness of HERA. Imagine in your organizations, your companies, meeting regularly and collaborating with your main competitors. And so that's sort of what it looks like from the outside that we're doing. We're certainly all trying to recruit similar types of students, but our collective goal is to get students in, as Mark mentioned, retain, and then out the door as graduates. And if they don't come to Carroll to do that, that's totally fine. I'm happy for them to be at Mark's institution. What we're looking for are impacts for this community in this region of Southeast Wisconsin.
Okay. So I'm going to maybe pivot a little bit and talk about the current landscape of higher education. And I want you to do a comparison between what's happening nationally and what's happening here locally. Is there a difference in the way people are responding locally and nationally? So talk about that a little bit more, please. And then Cindy, I'm going to ask you to follow up and talk about coming here 7 years ago in comparison to where you were at, and talking about the differences in the way the region where you were from, I think in Kentucky, and here in Wisconsin.
I'll start that. It seems like what we're seeing in southeastern Wisconsin and really across the state does mirror what's happening across the country. In terms of the demography, there are some differences. The Northeast is the worst in terms of demographics. Nathan Growy wrote a book called Demography and the Demand for Education. The Northeast is the worst. And it's really tough because you have cities like Philadelphia, Boston, New York that have like 40 to 60 different higher ed institutions. So the enrollment declines have been precipitous, challenging, incredibly tough. Vermont, New Hampshire, really tough. Midwest, second worst. And the West and the South are actually better. I often joke, if you had a UW Dallas, our problems would be over. We could pipe those students in. Sadly, sadly we don't. They don't have our wonderful weather. So anyway, you have these demographic differences, and then you have funding issues, and you have the political issues, and what we're seeing is that there's some national playbooks on all these different sides. So there's some interesting similarities. Then as far as the challenges economically, you're seeing privates and publics here. We're closing a campus this year. By June 30th, our UWM at Washington County will be closed. We're reevaluating how we approach Waukesha right now. We're looking at some great partnership possibilities. We're looking at a number of different things that we're doing to revitalize and innovate. But two-year campuses across the country have been hit incredibly hard. Again, that's a uniform type of thing. Then funding varies quite a bit. We're very fortunate in this state. We're one of the best funded technical college systems, but we're at the other extreme in terms of the UW system. We're 42nd or 43rd in terms of four-year public education. Then there's the national narrative we'll talk about in another question. That's happening similarly across the country. And then what that leads to is a lot of times questions about ROI, questions about enrollment and retention, but also bills and political moves to limit and curtail things that become funding contingencies.
So Cindy, talk about that, your, exactly, and your arrival here.
Do that. Let me just say one more thing about the funding of higher education here in Wisconsin. We know that our students have access, Wisconsin high schoolers have access to Wisconsin grants. And we lobby hard with our elected officials to increase the Wisconsin grant. And what that means is they can take that grant and apply it, whether they go to public, private, whatever kind of institution they choose to go to, which is good because we need a variety of institutions to meet the needs of the varying students who come our way. We've seen a very little increase in the Wisconsin grant through the years, where our neighbors in Illinois, in Michigan, Minnesota have really upped theirs. And so what does that mean and why does that matter? Where we would see before a student from Illinois or Michigan, Minnesota, think about coming to our institution, they're now thinking twice because their states have invested in giving much larger grants for them to stay there. So we need to do the same to keep our Wisconsin students here. And they can take that grant, they can go anywhere in the state. And so we're seeing a difference in the number of people who will come to some of our institutions. Can't speak for everyone, I know I can speak for my own self, where students say, my state grant at home is just too big, I'm going to stay home and go there rather than coming. And we know when students come to us and we recruit them from out of state, many of them stay. So that's that. The question that came my way, those who know me know that I've worked at multiple institutions, and like many of you in this room, I've lived in different states. And I can say when I first came, I did notice the narrative that I spoke about earlier, that's a national narrative, really was a heavier narrative here. And the echo chamber that we have within Wisconsin, it was louder here, I noticed. So I'll give you an example. I've worked in multiple states, but the last two were Kentucky and North Carolina. And both of those have different approaches, certainly. And for 10 years, Kentucky underwent this project called Double the Numbers. And this was a 10-year project, well, before I arrived here in Wisconsin, where it was 2-year, 4-year, public, private, corporations, elected officials, government, we were all in together to double the number of college graduates over a 10-year period because we knew the impact that would have economically on our state. And so we were all aligned. We were not in competition with one another. I don't mean about higher ed. I mean, we weren't in competition with our employers because our employers knew the benefit of it as well. And so we collaborated and worked together. I didn't see that as strong here when I first moved here. Mine's not working. Can you not hear me? Oh, I think they're good. Back and forth.
Share that. Just correct. Thank you.
Okay, how about that? Oh, it was a little bit better, I think. Sorry. So anyway, my point on that was I could feel a difference. This was the one place, the other place I worked at in recent years was Raleigh, North Carolina. And I said, if you want to go to a place that values higher education and post-secondary education, because I'm talking about, and this is not a knock against the trades, it's certificate programs, 2-year programs, 4-year programs. All of those were part of our double the number efforts in Kentucky. But living in Raleigh, you can tell a difference. Research Triangle Park, that is a place that it's an engine, and they value higher education because they know it will impact the state in significant ways in terms of economic improvement, and it has happened that way. So there's some of the things that I've noticed being here. It's the one place that I worked in higher education. I've been in higher education for more than 30 years. Where I had never felt that there was competition between my higher ed institution and an employer. And while we have wonderful relationships, the need for talent is so great for them. We can feel that tension sometimes of the employer saying, don't worry about college, don't worry about post-secondary education of any kind, just come on and we'll give you a good paying job here. While that's true, we know long-term, if we're going to look long-term in our state, we will want to invest more because we know the data is there and the potential for earning are significant for students who have some level of post-secondary education and training.
So I'm going to ask a question about which states are getting it right. Who do we want to model ourselves after? I think Ohio's doing really well. I think Pennsylvania's got a good example. Who's doing it right, and what can we learn from them and bring back to our community?
Greg, I think that's a great question, and the recent Wisconsin Policy Forum information shows at an individual level what's important in terms of the types of jobs. If you want to make more than 50 or more than 75,000, how important education is. But when we talk about regions that are getting it right, I'm going to back up and just ask you all to think about what are regions that you admire, regions that we hear an awful lot about, and what's common to all of them. So Dr. Gnadinger just talked about the research triangle. But if we go and talk about Silicon Valley, or we talk about Route 128 in Boston, or you talk about what's happening around Austin, Texas, or today in Miami, go to Wichita, you see the common element is an ecosystem and infrastructure where higher ed is central, whether it's on the research or the talent provision side. Those things are absolutely central. You can go internationally. You can go to Berlin. You can go to Stockholm. You can go to a number of other hubs that are happening globally, economically transformative, and higher ed is that central thing. Specific examples are both red and blue states. Florida is one that we would categorize obviously as a red state, but they have made investments in higher education that are remarkable. Aside from the political things that are going on there right now, they have had a good run. Tennessee, Ohio, making some really important partnerships between industry and higher ed. Let me give a specific example in a blue state, Washington. The tech sector companies went to the state legislature and said, we want to impose, how often does this happen in the world? We want to impose a higher tax rate on ourselves if you will fund more money into the University of Washington, Washington State University, into the ed sector, specifically for tech, STEM-related jobs. Increase our taxes, use that money for higher ed. That's like amazing. New York, Governor Hochul, what she has done, significant investment specifically in research, but also in the entire SUNY system. So we can think about blue and red states that are moving ahead in many ways. If you look at the surrounding states for us and the funding for higher education, we are lagging significantly, the state of Wisconsin. So this is what we oftentimes call the great social experiment. What's going to happen? We're seeing that right now in terms of the tax base, in terms of the incredible disparities that happen in terms of the different economies that we have, the different individual livelihoods, because of the lack of access to education, whether that's early childhood or all the way through post-secondary.
Cindy?
No, I don't have anything to add to that. That's exactly right. I know Virginia is another state on the rise, doing a lot of really innovative things there too. And we have the opportunity here, especially with the identification of the tech corridor and being a tech hub for the region. The opportunities are really right in front of us.
Yeah. So I'm going to ask probably a provocative question. Where'd you get it wrong, though? So all these headwinds, it seems like higher education is in a responsive mode. Do you accept any responsibility in not, paying attention to the trends? And do you think it's too late?
Well, I never think it's too late. I am completely optimistic. I think a couple of things, and then I'll let Mark expand upon it. We certainly in higher ed, we've been watching the trends, so that I think we've been well informed of and monitoring along. I think we probably should have and could have done better in our communication of what's needed in this region and working to tell the story a little bit better about why we need to invest so much in higher education. So I think that might have been a miss. And then, I'll just be honest, and I'm gonna state the obvious to my colleagues as well. And sometimes we can get in our own way in higher education. We are known to be slow to change. I don't know that I agree with that, but the perceptions that we are resistant to change, I think there's a little bit of that. I think it's part of how higher ed was structured 300 plus years ago. that we still follow those structures today. But I know that some of the most innovative, whether it's programming, ideas, have come out of higher ed institutions. So I certainly know higher ed is innovative. I don't think we tell our story well enough. And I do know we can be a little slower to move. As someone like me who's a little impatient, it frustrates me on my own campus at times. But so I think those concerns about higher education are real, and I know that many of us are working toward making changes as we know we need to.
Thank you. Well, 18 to 25 years ago, we all made mistakes. We didn't have enough kids. So that's our big challenge. But more seriously, I do think that if you look at how we're built today, and I say this nationally, if you look at the higher education system and what is needed, there is not the best alignment. And we have to do better at the types of innovation, the types of alignment. And what I mean by that specifically is what are the needs of employers, what are the needs of society, and how well are we built? How well are we offering the types of degrees and the speed to degree? And Greg, let's be honest, as much as I can point at that trend line in terms of why costs have increased, because let's just think about this for a moment. Across the country, states oftentimes looked at higher education spending as 5th, 6th, or 7th in terms of state priorities. In this state, we've always been number 5. What's ahead of us? Transportation, corrections, K-12, infrastructure, Medicaid, one or two others. We're number 5 or number 6. It's discretionary. So you've seen governors like Doyle, blue, Walker, red, that have had large cuts. We've had, in fact, our largest cuts in history were under a Democratic governor. But what we could do from 2000 to 2010 was increase our tuition. This was common. I could show you the same parallels across the country. So this is what's fueled that. And so while that's the explanation, you have to stand back and say, yeah, but what's the reality today? We have priced ourselves out of easy access for a lot of individuals. As much as I can say that a University of Wisconsin system education is going to cost you on the tuition front $40,000, $50,000. In privates, it's going to be generally more. There's a lot of things that we could do in terms of how we're built and how we're structured, but it's not going to be easy. And that's where you come back to what Cindy talked about in terms of the resistance to change. Recent president of Macalester, for 18 years, Macalester College, wrote a book. And his book is about exactly this issue, and part of the title is, in the spirit of change, whatever it is, I'm against it. Which kind of captures...
It's a great book, you should get it.
It kind of captures the mindset and culture. Now that said, I hope we are asked about some of the innovation, because there's some amazing things that we're doing to really try and help address that.
So you got a little bit ahead of my question. And I really want to know, what are we going to do about the cost? You have a situation where data shows that with more education, you have better earning opportunities. The cost is the issue. What can we do to deal with the cost of education, particularly around that the equity point that you made? Cost. Talk about that. What are you going to do to improve, reducing that cost burden?
Yeah, we're working on it. Is this okay? They gave me a new mic. We're working on it all the time. I know, especially my colleagues who are here from private higher ed, our goals have always been to keep cost as low as we can, and thanks to the generosity of our donors, and that's how we've always depended on, the generosity of our donors, our alumni, to give back and make sure that the types of scholarships and the amount of scholarships we're giving are in line with affordable education. The other thing I think is really important that we need to do more of are partnerships with our corporate partners. So whether that's healthcare, whether that's businesses, manufacturing, whatever it might be, those that need the types of graduates we're producing need to partner a little bit more with us, and we're seeing that happen in certain areas. So I have a meeting this afternoon back on campus. Corporations from Waukesha are coming to Carroll to talk about ways that we can produce the kinds of graduates they need, and in turn they'll invest back. And that would be in terms of scholarships. Again, when you do that, whether it's, the scholars for a certain area, then they know they've got a direct pipeline because that's where the internships will be, and then they'll have first dibs on hiring those students that they've invested in as well. So I think, there are lots of ways that we can look at reducing the cost. I can tell you that as you experience inflation in your homes, we experience it, those of us who run college campuses, in unbelievable ways. I have been dealing with those of you who've heard the Great Water Project out in Waukesha. We finally have Lake Michigan water this year. It's wonderful, 7 years in the making, but we will see over the 3-year period 45% cost in water. So if a household was paying $100 for a water bill, it's now $150. That's what they can anticipate, thanks to this project. For us at a place like Carroll, and I'm one of the smaller institutions, I'm nowhere near as big as UWM, I have 1,800 students who shower every day. 600 of them are athletes. They shower twice a day. And so the water bill on a campus like Carroll is unbelievably insignificant. So, whether it's the price of eggs, magnify that by the number of students that we're feeding on our campuses every day, and that's part of the inflation that we're seeing as well. It's very real, and we feel it every day.
So, well said. Scholarships, donations, those are important. Let me talk about some other things that many of our campuses are doing. I think Dr. Martin about the incredible MATC Promise program. That is enabled in part by philanthropic support, but also campus resources. That's a powerful message to students that if you come to MATC, we have the same thing at UW Milwaukee, we've got this at UW Parkside. Promise programs are really important for students, particularly those who are economically disadvantaged. So that's going to help a lot of people over. But we also have to do things to get students through faster. A lot of times it's time, not just to degree, time to paycheck. So dual enrollment is really amazing. We have 55 or 56,000 students today from the tech college in high schools getting dual enrollment. UW system, we have 11,000 students getting their advanced degrees. This helps with saving money. It helps with giving more confidence, building those credits right away. There's a lot of other partnership types of activities that we're involved with. Number of things, whether it's partnerships like with Marquette and UWM with Northwestern Mutual to accelerate the learning at earlier stages, or lots and lots of different activities working with employers to line up and get that alignment working at a much, much earlier stage. So those are some of the things. And then internally, we also have to look at our own cost structures where we can to reduce and streamline and go for more efficiencies. There's oftentimes this perception about bloat in higher ed, and I can tell you that our universities across Southeastern Wisconsin have that efficiency mindset and really built a lot of lean thinking into our operations. So those are some of the things that really make a big difference. I also think about the partnership. You want to talk about saving money. Today, with the tech colleges, you can go to any tech college in this region and automatically transfer to UWM with no additional time or cost needed. And that historically has been an obstacle. You want to be an engineer, you want to be a nurse, you want to be a police officer. Oh, I've got my associate degree, but now it's going to take 3 more years. We've streamlined that, and it's going to be really a great thing for the future. So those are things, in addition to a tuition increase, tuition freeze that we had for a decade that helps keep the cost down.
Yeah, I'll add too that the private institutions, my peers here, can also attest to the number of articulation agreements we've done in recent years with our 2-year partners. So that process is streamlined across most of our campuses.
So Mark and Cindy, thank you. Been a pleasure to hear from you. Joe, I know we have some wrap-up questions for folks, and I'm going to let you take the logistics.
First of all, can we please give a hand to Mark and Cindy? Now we're going to take about maybe 10 or 15 minutes to, there are questions I think that are going to go up behind me on the screen for you. You have experts at your tables, but I also would think, you saw data about in national surveys that people think less of a higher education degree than they once did. If you're one of those people sitting at that table and you're with a higher educational leader, I would volunteer that to them, challenge them on that, and ask them about that. If if you know, like my kids are on their way to college this year and next year, but they have friends and peers who have decided that college is not for them. You may be in the same boat. Have that discussion at your table as well, because I think those are the real issues that all of us need to grapple with when we're thinking about what higher education means. It's not for everybody. There are alternatives, but I think there can be some really good discussions. So we'll do that for the next 10 or 15 minutes, come back for a couple of finishing questions, and then Peggy will give something away when we're done, so stick around. Those questions, if you can't see them, that clearly appear. It's how can the business community be connected to higher ed solutions in innovation, community partnerships, workforce? Are there specific areas within higher ed that we can provide better advocacy to state government? Those are some of the questions for you to leap off to. Again, most of you have a higher ed leader at your table, and whether it's these or others, we just invite you to carry the conversation forward. Thanks. All right, folks, I hate to slow down great discussion, but we want to just have a little bit of wrap-up or dialogue from what the discussions have been at the tables before we break for the day. So Langston, my colleague Langston here, has the microphone here, and if there was something you talked about at your table or something, a question that came up, please, we would welcome you to share that now for the last few minutes of our discussion here. Anybody want to put a hand up and have a comment now? Peggy's got one down here. She can't wait. She can't wait till she gives something away. She has a...
I wrote this down because Mark was mentioning that he said $40 to $50 million is left on the table in Wisconsin alone in financial aid. Part of it, people not applying, the FAFSA is a struggle, but $40 to $50 million that is available that's still just sitting there. That was stunning to me.
And I guess that came out of the discussion. I think the mayor, Mark, others were at a high school, at Washington High School today, encouraging young people. I think it's now a requirement for graduation from MPS that you have to have filled out the FAFSA. It's gotten easier to do, but lots of us work with nonprofits or work in other areas of the community. That's one area I think that we can continue, because it is true that we're leaving money on the table, and access is by far one of the biggest issues that we have. Again, there are so many people here who are involved, whether it's in K-12 or in higher education. If there's something that struck you in the conversation, or one of the other higher ed leaders that wants to talk a little bit about something you had, now is your chance.
Okay. I think what we talked about more is really the need for a major business and university college overhaul in terms of coming together and what that model looks like in terms of workforce development. There's, I guess, a lot of money probably available from private industry if we can make the business case, the ROI for this, and it needs a lot more data. And then we need to have a vision of moving together differently. And we talked about it, and Jorge mentioned it's from collision of our two sectors into creative collaboration. And so I think that there's many more opportunities that we can pull together if we really talk together and realize the benefit from all that.
I was just to touch on the $40 to $50 million in aid that's left on the table. I'm Cara, I'm with the media, I'm with BizTime, so it's actually a question I have. So one, is that like pure, like is that grants or is that loans? And two, I know that the students are now being required at MPS to apply for the FAFSA, but how much is being done to help them and their families like understand what's a loan and like, because I think there's might be some anxiety there about, families and students going into debt and not understanding what's, if they apply for the FAFSA, if they're really going to be eligible for grant free money or a loan, that could see that causing some confusion and anxiety in some, working class families who can't take on more debt.
So I'll start that, and Phyllis, you might know in terms of the breakout. I think a lot of it is the grants, Kara. I don't know, I'll follow up with you and get you the exact breakout of that. We do need to have better financial aid counseling in high school, and I know that through the work of M-Cubed, which is MATC, UWM, and MPS working together, we are doing more of that. And that is the daunting aspect. It's one thing to get into college, it's another, how do I pay for it? And then the debt, and that's the story that's out there, because the debt has become significant, and that's why promise programs, scholarships, grants, dual enrollment, all the things that we're doing to accelerate the time and reduce the cost before you get to college are vitally important. But I will say, on the other side, if you read the book, McAllister, President, the discounting at privates is unsustainable, and just like all these other things, if we don't also look at the cost structure and how we are built, so those have to work together. Anybody else know on the grant? Phyllis, do you know on the grant versus loan piece of the FAFSA eligibility? Yeah. Okay.
Anyone else with a question or comment? I feel like Phil Donahue all of a sudden. So just one thing before I invite Peggy up to close. I think a lot of us, we have another, the discussion we had at our table and the discussion here I think was terrific, but I think sometimes, I can feel this from the GMC membership, it's like, what's next? What do we do? And I will tell you, so the GMC has been involved with HERA since its inception. There is some significant business involvement already, but I can say on behalf of the leaders from HERA, they're looking at expanding that table. It's all of the leaders from the higher educational institutions. There's some business and community representation on there now, but I think there's a willingness, not only a willingness, but a thirst for increasing that table. So if what we walk away from today is a handful more, if it's 3 or 4 or 6 additional GMC members who want to see a closer connection between what we're doing in higher education and that connection to business, that's a win from my standpoint of what I think we want the GMC to do. And we'll do some follow-up with you. And that's not to say that a number of us aren't already working on those. There are a number of you who are already on boards on these institutions who, we have people who are regents from from UW system who are part of the GMC as well. So it's not like nobody's already doing that. But I think what I can say on behalf of HERA, it is as focused as anything that I have seen over the last several years. And it's focused not only on the goals that were brought up here, but on this existential crisis in higher ed. And so there is a need and a desire to have more community involvement from that. And what we're going to try to do through the GMC and through your membership is, if that's a vehicle you choose, we want to make sure that that's as easy as possible and that's fruitful for you. And that would be, I think, fruitful for every one of the higher education representatives that's here as well. So again, I want to thank everybody for their participation in this today and for your continued work on what is one of the most important driving issues in our state and in our region. So with that, I'll invite Peggy up to close.
Thank you, Joel. Thank you all. Yes. Thank you all for participating in today's meeting. As we discussed, and it was very apparent from all of the discussion, education is the most basic tenet to advancing economic opportunity in one's life. The strained higher education system is not just affecting the institutions themselves. It is affecting our workforce and our economy. I ask each of you to identify your relationships in higher ed, including, I hope, some new relationships you made today, and reach out to those higher ed leaders soon. Consistent with what Joel just said, ask them what you can do to help, and we as the GMC will be reaching out to you to give you opportunities in that regard. In the meantime, we're going to continue to form the education committee for that strategic priority at the GMC, and we'll explore priority solutions for the challenges we face from early childhood through higher ed. Another reminder to all members of the GMC Board of Directors, please come on up here and meet me for a very brief annual meeting. This member meeting is adjourned, and I will now announce the randomly selected winner of today's gift. which is a $100 gift card donated by the Milwaukee Athletic Club for use in one of their restaurants. Thank you to the Milwaukee Athletic Club for hosting us again today and for this generous gift. And the winner is Joanne Anton.